Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the Archive. It is time once again for an installment of Archival GMing. This is where I take a look at various GM tips and tricks I have learned over the years. Normally, I frame these in the reference to a game I have covered in the past. This month's topic, I'm not going to be doing that. You see, one of the issues I have often run into with various RPGs is they have this tendency to grab at real-world pantheons, real-world deities. Now, in some cases, many of the people who worship these deities are dead and the religion is effectively deceased. There aren't that many people who worship the various Persian deities, for example. But you're still dealing with, these are deities that are worshipped by communities, whether it be in their original forms, in the case of Zoroastrianism and the various sects of Hinduism, whether it be Shinto or any other still long time actively practiced religion. At the same time, you've got instances where you have Reconstructionists. They're trying to find all these truths from the dead religions, like the Eleusinian mysteries, and are trying to recreate them. Or maybe they're trying to recreate the religion of the ancient Celts. And then, of course, you have the various pagan and neo-pagan movements where deity and your original culture aren't really a strongly tied thing, and you're following a spiritual path where you're looking at these different deities. Either way, in all these cases, these people genuinely worship these fantasy deities. And I want to talk about treating these with the respect that they are supposed to have. So sit back, relax, and listen as I talk about ways to treat deities in a fictional setting with respect so that you will not offend the people who actually worship them. I'm going to start with the most basic element. Research. You have to understand, we have access to the some knowledge of humankind through this thing called the internet. And it can be used for more than looking for porn and cat pics. And this is where we should start. I mean, yes, you could also go to a library if you have one nearby that is accessible. But generally, the internet is a useful source for just finding where to start looking. I mean, yes, you could go with the immediate impressions. Bast is a fluffy sex goddess. Thor has long blonde hair, and Kali is a crazy murder goddess. And you would be wrong on most of those counts. the treatment of Bastet, or Bastet, depending on who you're looking at, or what source you're using. You're talking about the goddess that was the protector of the pharaohs, was considered to be the right eye of Ra. Horus was Ra's left eye. And was a warrior goddess, a protector of hearth, home, and the pharaohs. Thor actually has red hair. And it's short red hair. Because you wear your hair short under a helmet. Things like that. And then, of course, you have Kali. Now, I'm going to admit I'm probably going to get some of this a little off. This is stuff that's based on my own previous research, and I couldn't find the sites again. So, I'm going to just go over very quickly what you can find about Kali, and I want you to understand that this is an example of how going by the surface or the immediate views from others can be deceiving. Right. The iconography we see of Kali is naked black-skinned woman, like actual black-skinned woman, wearing a necklace of skulls, a skirt of severed arms, with a lolling tongue red in the blood of a particular bull demon. She has 4 arms. One holds a sword. One holds a severed head. One holds a noose. One holds a lotus blossom. So, on the surface, this iconography is of a fearsome, violent deity. And yes, she is every bit fearsome and violent. But you peel back these layers and you look at things. Her skin is black because it's representing the infinity of the universe. Naked because, like the truth, she has nothing to hide. The necklace of skulls. There's one skull for each of the letters of the Sanskrit alphabet. The skirt of severed arms. Well, the hand is the instrument of your karma. The severed arms are representing being freed of your karma. The skulls representing the quest for knowledge. The sword represents the act of severing, of freeing oneself from the things that bind you to the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The severed head represents the being freed of your preconceptions, your thoughts, your things that keep you locked in that cycle. The noose simultaneously represents the moving on to the next step, but also the being bound into the cycle, and is why the favored method of execution among the thuggy cults was strangulation. And the lotus blossom is enlightenment. it gets a lot more complicated when you start looking back. She's dancing on Lord Shiva. They're in crematory grounds. What's this? Well, you're going to be looking at the fact that she's crushing someone underfoot. But it's more than that. It's Shiva represents the submission of the masculine energy to the feminine energy represented by Kali for the purpose of keeping balance in the cycle. The crematory grounds are because everything must end. But, you see, if you go with just the initial surface look, you're going to misrepresent Kali. You're going to misrepresent what she's about. And that is breaking free from the cycle that keeps us trapped. The cycle of life, death, rebirth, life, death, rebirth. Over and over and over. And that's just the start. Because, again, you want to know what you're talking about, what you're representing. You should never just go with that first gut reaction. Because, especially with many, I hate to say it, with many Americans and some in other countries, there's this idea that we know it all, that we don't need to research anything. And that can lead to accidentally offending people. A great example is there actually was a episode of famous TV series Xena Warrior Princess where they used Kali and ended up having to apologize to the Hindu American community. In this case, it's really important to understand that when I'm referring to Hindu, I'm referring to the collective of the different religions. I mean, you can start with just breaking them down into Vaishnavism and Shaivism, but it gets way more complicated. There's a couple hundred, at least, different separate religions under the umbrella that Western scholars call Hinduism. And that's something that's very important to remember. You're not always dealing with one set of ideologies. Which comes to the next step, the understanding the practices and stories. Bast is known as a dual-natured deity in a way. She is Bast, the protector of pharaohs, but under the right circumstances, she is also Sekhmet. And what happens is something happens that enrages her. And it is Sekhmet that comes out. And ultimately, the method to slake Sekhmet's bloodthirst is, well, not blood, But the Egyptian beers, which were a reddish in color. And yes, the Egyptians invented beer. And the story is, beer was invented to keep Sekhmet in line. Just saying. But that tells you something as well. It tells you that the protector, under the right circumstances, can be a dangerous, blind rage monster, basically. That has to be brought into a stupor to finally be calmed down. That's one way you can look at it. But every story that you're going to find about each god is going to be different. There's the story of Thor pretending to be Freya to get his hammer back. Of course, Thor kind of also killed all the giants in the room after he got his hands back on Mjolnir. And, you have... Honestly, there are so many different stories. Every deity that you're going to look at. And if you're going to do these stories, if you're going to put these gods into your setting, or you're going to be doing any game involving these, you want to know the major stories. You want to know the story of how Maka, the one aspect of the triple goddess, the Morrigan, cursed the men of Ulster. You might just want to know the story of Tristan and Isolde. You might want to know about how the Celtic healing god Dionchect murdered his own son in a fit of professional jealous rage when his son restored Nuada Silverhand's hand, so that Nuada could be the king again. Because of this little thing in the Irish mythologies about the king must be whole and without blemish. Which, yes, that's a thing. You need to understand those elements. You need to understand the cultures that they're from. It's said, for example, I don't know for certain, that the ancient Egyptian language did not have a word for virgin. I cannot verify that, but it is a story I have heard. You want to understand why certain deities are the way that they are. For example, why was a temple prostitute that was able to subdue and civilize Enkidu when Gilgamesh, a mighty warrior, couldn't? What was the story being told there? What is the story of the War of Troy? More than that, oh man, you can really get into Troy. There's so much symbolism in that entire story. Is the Trojan horse an actual giant wooden horse? Or is it a reference to an earthquake striking the city? You have the Paris being given that horrible choice of who's the more beautiful, Hera, Athena, or Aphrodite. That, talk about a no-win situation there. He was screwed no matter who he chose. I think the choice of Aphrodite, while the logical one, was probably not the best. Maybe he should have said Hera. Who knows? Either way, that was a horrible no-win situation for the poor guy. And then, of course, you have to deal with, the opening line of the Iliad, talking about it being the story of the rage of Achilles. Then you have that. But then you also have the whole Odyssey, where archaeologists have been able to actually figure out every step of the Odyssey, every place Odysseus went. And with this knowledge, this can, well, first off, it grounds it in reality, but there's also just the fact that it makes it more real. It makes it a firmer story to tell. But, you also have to look at the story of Beowulf. That is a form of mythology, even though no gods feature in it. And, there's great ways to subvert said story. See the 13th Warrior. But ultimately, the story tells about the culture that it was from, the things that they valued. Knowing the stories tells you what the values of the people who worship these deities are. And these will allow you to approach them in a manner respectfully, because you'll be approaching them from a position of knowing what they mean, knowing how the people who came from these, who worship these deities, how they thought in a way. And at the same time, you can glean some of the practices from said stories. The offerings of beer to Sekhmet, for example. And various other bits and pieces here and there. When all is said and done, you really have to actually treat these with respect. You need to understand them for what they are. Their symbolisms, the stories that shape them, the values that they represent. Because these are what, if you have someone who worships one of these deities, these are going to be how they're going to react to your portrayal. This is how they're going to see how you are treating what they worship. So, in general, the big advice, the big takeaway is research Learn what the symbols on the deity mean through whatever means you can, and learn these stories. Or at least enough of the stories involving said deity that you can kind of get a real feel for them. Not a let's go with what everyone says it is. Because, believe me, many of the deities are a lot more complicated than our modern culture tends to see them. And with that will be the end of this month's Archival GMing. I will see you next month for another installment. And of course, we have my normal twice-a-weekly videos. So until my next video, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.